All right, welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're a focused learner with the mind of a cunning strategist, you are in exactly the right place today. We're diving deep into the ultimate strategist's toolbox. We're going to decode 30 distinct chess tactics, pulling the raw mechanics to board control right from our source material. So, sit back, tune out the noise, and get ready to uncover the real secrets of the chessboard.
If I'm going down, you're going down with me. Now, this dramatic little quote perfectly captures the ruthless, highly calculated mindset you need to actually master chess. It's not just about surviving, it's about making every single piece on that board count, right down to its very last breath. Even your doomed pieces can and should exact a heavy, punishing toll on your opponent.
So how do we make sense of 30 different tactics without our head spinning? Well, here's our roadmap. 1. Deception and necessary sacrifices. 2. Geometry and power plays. 3. The element of surprise. 4. Trapping the enemy king. And finally, 5. Endgame execution and survival.
Let's jump into Phase 1. Deception and necessary sacrifices. Mastering the art of misdirection.
Okay, let's look at how we actually manipulate the defense. We've got 3 distinct tactics here, and they all achieve the exact same strategic goal: destroying or distracting your opponent's guards. First up is deflection, where you force a key piece away, like sacrificing a rook just to drag their queen off a crucial square. Then there's interference. This is where you literally drop a piece right between an enemy and its defender to break their connection. And finally, undermining, also known as removal of the guard. That's where you just capture the defensive piece outright and leave their best assets totally exposed.
Building on that misdirection, we get into the literal art of sacrifice. A decoy is pretty straightforward. You lure an enemy piece into a specific square for an ambush. Clearance is brilliant, though. That's when you sacrifice your own piece just to clear a square, file, or diagonal for another piece. Imagine giving up your queen just so your knight has the absolute perfect square to deliver a fork. And then you have the pure sacrifice, intentionally giving up material for a massive, game-ending goal. I mean, the source brings up the legendary Paul Morphy sacrificing his queen on d8 to deliver a stunning checkmate. Just incredible.
Which actually brings us right back to our opening quote. Enter the desperado. A desperado is a piece whose time has completely run out. It's totally doomed. But instead of just rolling over and accepting its fate, it operates on this brilliant, spiteful logic. If your knight is hopelessly trapped anyway, a desperado tactic means you might as well grab an enemy pawn on your way out. Maximum damage before departure, right?
Moving right along to Phase 2, geometry and power plays, controlling the board. Mastering the board is really all about understanding how physical placement dictates raw power. And there's a huge critical difference between 2 classic geometric moves, the pin and the skewer. In a pin, the attacked piece is immobilized because it's shielding a more valuable piece behind it. But a skewer? That's the exact reverse. The more valuable piece is the one in front. It's forced to run away, exposing the weaker piece behind it. Our source perfectly captures the brutal humor of a skewer with a queen sacrifice scenario. It's literally like the king stepping aside and saying, "Honey, watch out, she talks too much."
So what happens when you use that geometry to create overlapping threats? You get multi-pronged attacks. A fork is simple but deadly. One tricky piece, usually a knight, attacking 2 things at once. A discovered attack is a bit stealthier. You move a piece and boom, you suddenly uncover an attack from a piece sitting right behind it. But the crown jewel? The double check. Your king is checked by 2 pieces on a single move. The brutal thing here is you can't block it and you can't capture your way out of it. You literally have no choice but to physically move the king.
Still focusing on board geometry? Let's talk about aligning your forces. A battery is that classic stacking move, lining up 2 rooks on the same file to exert massive pressure. An X-ray attack is wildly snaky, attacking a piece indirectly right through an intervening piece. And then there's overloading. Think about a single, stressed-out pawn trying to defend 2 different pieces at the same time. The absolute second that pawn is forced to move, its whole defense just instantly collapses.
All right, Phase 3, the element of surprise. Catching 'em off guard.
Okay, you've got to love this striking German term Zwischenzug. It translates to an in-between move. This is when your opponent starts what they think is a totally forced sequence of moves. They think they've got you entirely figured out, but instead of giving them the expected reply, you drop a completely unexpected threat right into the middle of the sequence. It's a total rug pull that derails their entire calculation.
Because sometimes, the absolute best defense is a shocking offense. Take the counter threat.
Instead of retreating when you're attacked, you respond with an even more severe threat of your own, shifting the game's momentum in a split second. Then there's en passant. This is that special pawn capture where an opponent's pawn moves 2 squares forward from start, lands right beside yours, and you capture it as if it only moved 1 square. It is a rule that consistently catches beginners completely by surprise.
Now, in chess tactics, the simple number 7 basically spells total destruction. We're talking about putting your rooks on the 7th rank. When 2 rooks invade that 7th row, it's game over. They act like a giant vacuum cleaner, just gobbling up undefended pawns, completely cutting off the enemy king, and coordinating an unstoppable checkmate.
Phase 4. Trapping the enemy king. Closing the net.
All of this misdirection in geometry builds up to one of the most aesthetically pleasing tactics you'll ever see, the windmill. Typically, you use a rook and a bishop for this. It's a devastating, swinging pendulum. The rook moves, delivering a discovered check. The king has to move, and the rook gobbles up some free material. Then the rook retreats back to its original square, gives a direct check, and resets the trap. The sequence just repeats over and over, grinding the opponent down to nothing.
Once you have them on the run, you gotta corner them. A mating net is when you carefully restrict all the king's escape squares to set up an easy mate. A backrank mate exploits a king stuck behind its own pawns. But smothering? Smothering is the ultimate betrayal. You actively force the opponent's own pieces to physically block their king's escape. As the source hilariously frames the king's inner monologue, "You're blocking my escape, you stupid!"
Finally, Phase 5. Endgame execution and survival. Closing the game.
And here we arrive at pure psychological torture, zugzwang. This is a nightmare scenario where literally any legal move a player makes will actively worsen their position. The source points out a brilliant setup where a player sacrifices a rook, leaving the opponent with only 2 legal moves left, and both of them lead to an immediate checkmate. You are forcing them into a lose-lose dilemma where they have to pull the trigger on their own demise.
Out here in the endgame, the humble pawn becomes an absolute weapon. A passed pawn has an unstoppable path to promote. A pawn breakthrough is this genius move where you actually sacrifice multiple pawns just to clear the way for one single passed pawn to make it through. And then there's under promotion. You know, sometimes getting a queen is actually the worst move you could make. You might need to promote to a knight, bishop, or rook just to avoid a stalemate or to hit a specific tactical angle a queen can't manage.
Speaking of stalemates, check out this unbelievable piece of history. A stalemate, remember, is when a player isn't in check but has 0 legal moves, so the game just ends in a draw. Well, in a real game back in 1880, White was down 5 points of material. It was completely hopeless. But the player suddenly realized his king was completely boxed in, so he just chucked his queen away as a sacrifice, deliberately leaving himself with 0 legal moves. He turned a guaranteed crushing loss into an official, miraculous tie. No way, right?
Which leaves us with 2 very different endgame mindsets. If you're losing, your only goal is survival. You want a perpetual check, putting the enemy king in a loop of inescapable checks so the game is forced into a draw. But if you're winning, your goal is simplification. You actively trade pieces down, wipe the board clean, and avoid falling into any trap. You're just reducing the game to a simple, mechanical win that requires almost no brain power.
So, we've covered everything from the subtle art of misdirection all the way to scraping by for absolute endgame survival. You've got the tools now, so I'll leave you with this. Which of these brilliant tactics are you going to pull out to completely outsmart your very next opponent? Take these strategies, set up the board, and go claim your victory.